the Olmec Jade Carvers, close your eyes and let yourself drift back through time, far beyond memory, to the misty rainforests of ancient Mesoamerica. Feel the warm, humid air on your skin as we journey to a time when the world was younger, when the secrets of jade were whispered only to those whose hands were blessed by the gods themselves. Chapter 1: The Sacred Valley. In the heart of what would one day be called Mexico, where the morning mist clung to ancient cecropier trees like veils of silver, there lived a people whose very souls were intertwined with the green stone of the earth. The Olmec, they would be called by later civilizations, though they knew themselves simply as the people of the jade. The valley where our story begins was a place of perpetual twilight, where shafts of golden sunlight filtered through the dense canopy above, creating pools of warm light that danced and shifted with the gentle movement of leaves. Here, beside a crystal-clear stream that sang its way through smooth stones, sat Itzel, her weathered hands moving with the fluid grace of decades spent in communion with jade. She was perhaps 60 summers old, though in this timeless place age seemed less important than wisdom. Her fingers, stained green from years of working the sacred stone, moved across a piece of jade with the tenderness of a mother caressing her child. The stone was pale green, shot through with veins of deeper emerald that seemed to pulse with inner life. Itzel's workshop was a simple structure, open to the forest air, built from cecropier wood and palm fronds. Around her, arranged with careful precision, were the tools of her ancient craft, obsidian blades sharper than any metal, wooden drills worn smooth by countless hours of use, and bowls of various sizes filled with water and fine sand for polishing. But most precious of all were the jade stones themselves, each one selected with care from the riverbeds and quarries where the earth offered up its green treasures. Some were smooth river stones, polished by centuries of flowing water. Others were raw chunks, freshly quarried from the sacred mountains, their potential still hidden beneath rough surfaces. This morning, as the mist began to lift and the forest awakened with the calls of howler monkeys and the rustle of caddis in the underbrush, Itzel was beginning work on her most ambitious project yet, a ceremonial mask that would be worn by the high priest during the most sacred rituals of their people. The jade for this mask had come from the holiest of quarries, a place high in the mountains, where it was said the rain god himself had wept tears of green stone. The piece was magnificent, large enough for a full face mask, with coloring that ranged from the palest sage to the deepest forest green. But more than its size or beauty, this jade possessed something that made Itzel's hands tingle when she touched it: spiritual power. Chapter 2: The Young Apprentice. As Itzel contemplated her work, she heard the soft footfalls of her apprentice approaching through the forest floor carpet of fallen leaves. Itzamna was barely 16, chosen for his exceptional sensitivity to the spiritual qualities of jade and his steady hands that seemed never to tremble. No matter how delicate the work. "Good morning, Grandmother Itzel," he said softly, using the respectful title that acknowledged not just her age, but her mastery of the sacred craft. In his arms, he carried a bundle wrapped in soft cotton cloth, the day's selection of jade pieces that he had cleansed in the sacred cenote at dawn. Itzel looked up from her work and smiled, her eyes crinkling with warmth. "Good morning, young carver. Did the stones sing to you this morning as you cleansed them?" This was not merely a poetic question. The Olmec believed that jade possessed a voice, a spiritual essence that could communicate with those who had learned to listen. Itzamna nodded seriously as he unwrapped his bundle, revealing a collection of jade pieces in various shades of green, from the palest celadon to deep, rich emerald. "This one especially," he said, lifting a smooth, egg-shaped piece of medium green jade. "It seems to hum with energy. I believe it wishes to become something sacred." Itzel reached out and took the stone, closing her eyes as she held it. The jade was warm to the touch, warmer than the morning air could account for. She could feel its energy, a gentle vibration that seemed to resonate with her own heartbeat. "Yes," she murmured, "this one has been waiting. It wants to become a pendant, something to be worn close to the heart." She set the stone aside carefully and returned her attention to the ceremonial mask. "But first, we must finish this. Come, sit beside me, and I will teach you about the sacred geometries that must be preserved in all ceremonial pieces." Itzamna settled himself on a woven mat beside his teacher, his young face serious with concentration. He had been her apprentice for 3 years now, but he still felt the weight of responsibility that came with learning the most sacred arts of his people. Not everyone could become a jade carver. It required not just skill with tools, but spiritual sensitivity, artistic vision, and above all, the patience to spend months or even years on a single piece. Chapter 3: The Sacred Geometries. "Jade is not merely stone," Itzel began, her voice taking on the cadence of teaching, of wisdom passed down through generations, the material form of divine energy. When we carve jade, we are not imposing our will upon it, but rather revealing the sacred forms that already exist within. She traced her finger along the surface of the jade mask, following lines that were barely visible to the untrained eye, but were as clear as roadways to her experienced gaze. Every piece of jade contains the patterns of creation itself, the spirals of growth, the symmetries of the cosmos, the proportions that govern all living things. Itzamna leaned closer, trying to see what his teacher saw in the stone. Gradually, his eyes began to pick out the subtle variations in color and texture, that suggested different depths and densities within the jade. It was like looking at clouds and beginning to see shapes. Once you learned how to look, the forms seemed obvious. The face we will carve, Itzel continued, must follow the sacred proportions revealed to our ancestors in dreams. The distance from the forehead to the nose must equal the distance from the nose to the chin. The width of the eyes must match the width of the mouth. These are not arbitrary rules, but reflections of the divine order that underlies all creation. She picked up a piece of charcoal and began to sketch lightly on the jade surface, marking the key points and proportions. Her movements were sure and confident, the result of having made these same calculations hundreds of times before. But each piece was unique, requiring her to adapt the universal principles to the specific characteristics of the individual stone. Why are these proportions so important, grandmother? Itzamna asked, studying the emerging design. Because, Itzel replied, when we create something that reflects the divine proportions, it becomes a bridge between the human world and the world of the spirits. A mask made with the proper proportions does unjust represent a Gadit, becomes a vessel through which the God can manifest in our world. The morning air was growing warmer as the sun climbed higher, but the dense canopy above kept the workspace cool and pleasant. Around them, the forest hummed with life, the drone of insects, the calls of birds, the rustling of small animals in the underbrush. These sounds formed a natural symphony that seemed to enhance the meditative quality of their work. Chapter 4. The first cut with the proportions marked. Itzel was ready to make the first cut. This was always the most crucial moment in any carving project, the point where the jade would either accept the carver's vision or reveal its own preferences. She selected an obsidian blade, its edge so sharp it could split a hair lengthwise, and held it poised above the jade. Before every first cut, she instructed Itzamna, "We must ask permission of the stone and of the spirits that dwell within it. We must promise to work with respect, to reveal only what should be revealed, and to create something worthy of the sacred material we have been given." She closed her eyes and whispered a prayer in the ancient tongue, words that had been spoken by jade carvers for generations beyond counting. The prayer asked for guidance, for steady hands, and for the wisdom to see what the jade wanted to become. When she finished, she opened her eyes and made the first delicate cut. The obsidian blade bit into the jade with barely a whisper of sound, removing a tiny curl of green stone. Itzel examined the cut carefully, noting how the jade responded to the blade, whether it cut cleanly or showed signs of internal stress. "This piece was excellent, good," she murmured, more to herself than to her apprentice. "This jade is willing to work with us," she continued, cutting, each stroke deliberate and purposeful. The work was incredibly slow removing. Even a small amount of material required hundreds of tiny cuts, each one carefully planned and executed. But this patience was part of the sacred nature of the craft. Jade could not be rushed or forced. It demanded time, attention, and respect. As she worked, Itzel began to tell Itzamna the stories that were traditionally shared during the carving process. These were not merely entertainment, but an essential part of the teaching, carrying within them the deeper meanings and purposes of their craft. Long ago, she began, her voice soft and rhythmic as her hands continued their precise work. When the world was new and the gods still walked among mortals, there was a mountain that reached to the very heavens. At its peak grew a tree whose leaves were made of jade, and whose fruit was the knowledge of all sacred things. Chapter 5. The Legend of the Jade Tree. The tree was tended by a goddess whose beauty was beyond mortal comprehension. Itzel continued, her obsidian blade moving in tiny, precise strokes across the jade surface. Her skin was the color of jade, her hair flowed like water over green stones, and her eyes held the depths of the forest itself. Itzamna listened with rapt attention, though he had heard this story many times before. Each telling revealed new details, new layers of meaning that he was now mature enough to understand. The stories were like the jade itself, their true beauty only emerged through patient contemplation. One day, a young mortal man climbed the sacred mountain, drawn by rumors of the jade tree's power. He was not evil, but he was impatient, and he desired to possess the tree's wisdom quickly, without the long years of preparation that the goddess required of all who would approach her sacred grove. As she spoke, Itzel's hands never paused in their work. The rough outline of a face was beginning to emerge from the jade, still crude, but already suggesting the divine features that would eventually grace the finished mask. When the man reached the summit, he was overwhelmed by the tree's beauty. Without permission, without prayer, without proper preparation, he reached out and plucked one of the jade leaves. The moment his fingers touched it, the leaf turned to ordinary stone in his hand. Itzamna knew how the story ended, but he still felt a little thrill of tension as his teacher reached the climax. The goddess appeared before him, not angry, but profoundly sad. You sought to take by force what can only be received as a gift, she told him. The jade leaves carry wisdom, but wisdom cannot be stolen. It must be earned through patience, humility, and service. Itzel paused in her carving to look directly at her apprentice. This is why we approach our work with such care, young one. We are not trying to conquer the jade, but to earn its cooperation. We work slowly, not because we must, but because this slowness is itself a form of prayer, a demonstration of our respect for the sacred material we have been given. The morning was advancing, and shafts of sunlight were beginning to penetrate deeper into the forest canopy, creating a constantly shifting pattern of light and shadow on their workspace. The quality of light was perfect for detailed work, bright enough to see clearly, but not so harsh as to create confusing shadows or cause eye strain. Chapter 6. The Art of Patience. As the day progressed, other members of their community began to arrive at the workshop. This was normal. Jade carving was not a solitary craft, but a communal activity that brought together artists, apprentices, and even casual observers who came to watch and learn. First to arrive was Akbal, an elderly man whose specialty was creating the finest jade jewelry. His hands, even more stained with jade dust than Itzel's, trembled slightly with age, but his eye for quality was still unmatched. He examined Itzel's work with the critical gaze of a master craftsman. "The proportions are excellent," he pronounced after a long moment of study, "and the jade is responding well to your touch. This will be a powerful piece when it is complete." Next came Extel, a middle-aged woman who was known for her innovative techniques in jade polishing. She had developed new methods using different grades of sand and various plant materials that could bring out colors and patterns in jade that had never been achieved before. She settled herself at her own workspace and began preparing materials for her day's work. The youngest member of their group was Nalani, barely 12 years old, but already showing remarkable sensitivity to the spiritual aspects of jade work. She was not yet old enough to handle the sharp tools required for carving, but she assisted the others by preparing materials, organizing tools, and learning through careful observation. "Grandmother Itzel," Nalani said softly, approaching with a bowl of clean water and fresh sand for polishing, "may I ask about the dreams?" Itzel smiled at the child's careful politeness. "Of course, little one. What would you like to know?" "The elders say that the greatest jade carvers receive their designs in dreams, visions sent by the gods themselves. Is this true?" The question sparked a lively discussion among the assembled carvers. This was one of the most mysterious aspects of their craft, the role that dreams and visions played in guiding their work. "It is true," Akbal said, his weathered voice carrying the authority of decades of experience. "But such dreams come only to those who have dedicated their entire lives to the craft. They are not random gifts, but the result of years of preparation, meditation, and spiritual purification." Chapter 7. The Sacred Dreams. Itzel set down her tools and gave Nalani her full attention. This was clearly an important moment for the young girl, who was just beginning to understand the deeper mysteries of their craft. "The dreams do come," Itzel confirmed, "but you must understand that they are not ordinary dreams. They are communications from the spirits of the jade itself and from the gods who govern our craft. To receive such dreams, One must live in a state of constant readiness, always open to guidance from the sacred realm. She gestured to the mask she was carving. This very piece came to me in a dream 3 months ago. I saw it complete, exactly as it will be, when finished every detail of the carving, every nuance of color and texture. The dream showed me not just what it would look like, but what it would mean, how it would be used in ceremony, and what spiritual powers it would possess. Itzamna looked up from his own work. He was practicing basic cuts on a small piece of practice jade with intense interest. But how do you know the difference between an ordinary dream and a sacred vision? Experience teaches you, Exgel replied, joining the conversation. Sacred dreams have a quality that ordinary dreams lack. They are more vivid, more detailed, and they carry with them a sense of absolute certainty. When you wake from such a dream, you don't wonder whether it was Rilu. No. Also, added Akbal, sacred dreams always serve a purpose beyond the individual carver. They show us pieces that are needed for ceremonies, for healing, or for maintaining the spiritual balance of our community. They are never about personal glory or profit, but always about service to the gods and to our people. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a messenger from the central temple complex. He was a young priest, his body painted with the sacred symbols of his order, and he carried the jade-tipped staff that marked him as an official representative of the high priest. Master Itzel, he said formally, bowing with the respect due to her status as the community's greatest jade carver. The high priest requests your presence at the temple. He wishes to discuss the ceremonial mask you are creating. Itzel nodded gravely. Such a summons was both an honor and a responsibility. She carefully covered her work with a soft cloth and prepared to leave, but first she turned to her apprentice. Continue practicing your cuts, Itzamna, but do not attempt anything too ambitious while I am gone. Remember, patience is the greatest virtue of our craft. Better to make 1,000 perfect practice cuts than to ruin good jade through haste. Chapter 8. The Temple of Jade. The temple complex was a marvel of Olmec architecture and artistry. A series of pyramidal structures arranged around courtyards filled with reflecting pools and gardens of sacred plants. But what made it truly extraordinary was the jade everywhere. Surfaces were decorated with jade mosaics, jade sculptures, and jade ornaments that caught and reflected light in countless shades of green. Itzal walked slowly through the complex, taking time to appreciate the work of previous generations of jade carvers. Some of the pieces were centuries old, created by masters whose names were now known only to the gods, but whose skill lived on in these enduring works of art. The high priest Kukulkan was waiting for her in the Chamber of Sacred Stones, a circular room at the heart of the temple complex, where the most precious jade artifacts were kept. He was an imposing figure, tall and lean, with the serene composure that came from decades of spiritual discipline. Around his neck hung a jade pectoral of extraordinary beauty, a piece that had been carved by Itzel's own teacher many years before. "Master Itzel," he greeted her with formal courtesy. "Thank you for answering my summons. I wished to speak with you about the ceremonial mask you are creating, to ensure that it will serve its intended purpose in the upcoming Festival of the Green Sun." The Festival of the Green Sun was the most important ceremony in the Olmec religious calendar, held only once every 13 years when the celestial alignments were precisely correct. During this festival, the high priest would wear the jade mask and perform rituals that were believed to renew the spiritual energy of the entire community. "I have been guided by the sacred dreams," Itzel replied, "and the jade itself has shown me what it wishes to become. The mask will be powerful, suitable for the most sacred ceremonies." Kukulkan studied her face intently, like all high-ranking priests, and could often perceive things that remained hidden to ordinary people. After a moment, he nodded with satisfaction. "I sense the truth in your words. The spirits are pleased with your work. But I must ask, will the mask be ready in time? The festival is only 6 months away, and such work cannot be rushed." "It will be ready," Itzel assured him. "The jade is cooperative, and my hands are steady. But you are right that it cannot be rushed. I will need to work with complete focus, without other distractions." This was both a promise and a request. The high priest understood immediately Itzel was asking to be relieved of her other duties, so that she could concentrate entirely on this crucial project. Chapter 9. The Deepening Work. Returning to her workshop. Itzel found her apprentice, still practicing his basic cuts, his face furrowed with concentration as he tried to achieve the smooth, even strokes that looked so effortless when his teacher performed them. "How did it go with the high priest?" Itzamna asked, pausing in his work. "He has given me permission to focus entirely on the ceremonial mask," Itzel replied, uncovering her work and examining the progress she had made that morning. "This means that for the next 6 months you will take on more responsibility for the day-to-day work of the workshop." This was both exciting and terrifying for the young apprentice. More responsibility meant more trust, more opportunities to develop his skills, but also more chances to make costly mistakes. "What will you need me to do?" he asked, trying to keep the nervousness from his voice. "Continue with your practice cuts until your technique is flawless," Itzel instructed. "Then you can begin work on simple pieces, pendants, ear ornaments, small ceremonial objects. Nothing too ambitious, but good practice for developing your skills." She settled back into her work position and picked up her obsidian blade. The face on the mask was becoming more defined with each passing hour, but there was still an enormous amount of work to be done. The rough shaping was only the beginning. After that would come the detailed carving of features, the careful hollowing of the interior, and finally the exhaustive polishing process that would bring out the jade's full beauty. As she worked, other members of the community continued to arrive and depart, creating a gentle rhythm of social interaction that was an integral part of the workshop atmosphere. Some came to commission pieces, others to trade materials or share news. A few simply came to watch and meditate, finding peace in the slow, repetitive motions of jade carving. The afternoon light filtering through the forest canopy was perfect for detailed work, and Itzel made excellent progress on the mask's features. The eyes were taking shape, not human eyes, but the stylized, supernatural eyes of a deity, with the characteristic Olmec almond shape and the subtle suggestion of inner fire. As she carved, she could feel the jade responding to her touch, becoming more alive and expressive with each careful cut. This was the mysterious aspect of jade carving that could never be fully explained, the way that patient, respectful work seemed to awaken something within the stone itself. Chapter 10: The Jade's Secret. By late afternoon, as the forest began to prepare for evening with the changing calls of birds and the shifting patterns of light, Itzel made a remarkable discovery. As she worked on the area around the mask's left temple, her blade revealed a vein of jade, unlike anything she had ever seen before. Most jade showed variations in color and clarity, but this was different. It seemed to glow with an inner light, as if it contained trapped starlight or crystallized moonbeams. The vein was thin, perhaps no wider than a blade of grass, but it ran deep into the stone and followed the exact curve where the mask's most important decorative elements would be placed. "Itzamna," she called softly, her voice filled with wonder. "Come and see this." Her apprentice set down his own work and hurried over, gasping when he saw the luminous vein of jade that Itzel's careful carving had revealed. "I've never seen jade like this," he whispered, as if speaking too loudly might cause the miraculous sight to disappear. "Nor have I," Itzel admitted. "This jade is more sacred than I realized. The gods have blessed this stone with their own light. The discovery changed everything." This was no longer simply a ceremonial mask, but a true relic, a piece of jade that had been touched by divine power. Such pieces were incredibly rare. Perhaps only one appeared in a generation, if that. "What does this mean for the carving?" Itzamna asked. Itzel sat back on her heels, studying the stone with new eyes. "It means that we must be even more careful, even more respectful. This jade has chosen to reveal its secret to us, and we must prove worthy of that trust." She covered the mask carefully with its cloth and began to gather her tools. "We will not work on it again today. Tonight, I must fast and meditate asking for guidance on how to proceed. Such sacred jade requires special preparations. As evening approached and the workshop began to quiet down, Itzel prepared for the spiritual disciplines that would occupy her night. She would not eat until dawn, would spend the dark hours in prayer and meditation, opening her spirit to receive whatever guidance the gods might choose to provide. This was not unusual in their craft. Any major development in an important piece required spiritual preparation. The Olmec understood that jade carving was not merely a technical skill, but a form of spiritual practice that connected the carver directly to the divine realm. Chapter 11. The Night of Visions. As darkness settled over the forest and the workshop grew quiet, Itzel made her way to the sacred cenote, where she performed her most important spiritual practices. The cenote was a natural limestone pool fed by underground springs, its water so clear and still that it perfectly reflected the stars above. She lowered herself into the cool water, feeling the day's tensions and concerns dissolve in its embrace. The cenote was believed to be a portal to the underworld, a place where the boundaries between the physical and spiritual realms grew thin. Here, if anywhere, she might receive the guidance she needed. Sitting in the water, with only her head above the surface, Itzel began the ancient chants that had been taught to her by her own master decades ago. The words were in the oldest form of their language, so archaic that their literal meaning was sometimes unclear, but their spiritual power was undimmed by age. As she chanted, the stars seemed to grow brighter, their light penetrating the water around her and creating an ethereal glow that made her feel suspended between earth and sky. Hours passed in this meditative state, her consciousness gradually expanding beyond the boundaries of her individual self. It was near midnight when the vision came. She found herself standing in a vast hall made entirely of jade, its walls carved with intricate patterns that seemed to move and shift in the flickering light of jade torches. At the center of the hall stood a figure of overwhelming presence, tall, luminous, with skin that appeared to be carved from the finest jaden eyes that held the wisdom of ages. Itzel, the figure spoke, its voice resonating through her entire being. You have been chosen to create something of great importance. The mask you carve will not merely serve in ceremony, but will become a bridge between our realm and yours. The divine figure gestured, and suddenly Itzel could see the mask as it would appear when complete, not just its physical form, but its spiritual significance. She saw it being worn in ceremony, saw the way it would channel divine energy, saw the effects it would have on all who witnessed its use. The light you have discovered within the jade, the figure continued, is a fragment of the primordial fire that gave birth to the world. Handle it with the greatest care, for it carries within it the power of creation itself. The vision continued for what felt like hours, revealing not just the final form of the mask, but the precise techniques that would be required to complete it. When Itzel finally emerged from her trance state, the first light of dawn was beginning to filter through the forest canopy. Chapter 12. The Sacred Techniques returning to her workshop with the dawn. Itzel found Itzamna already there, preparing the day's materials with the quiet efficiency that marked him as a promising apprentice. He looked up as she approached, immediately sensing that something significant had occurred during her night of meditation. "The spirits spoke to you," he said, more statement than question. "They did," Itzel confirmed. Uncovering the ceremonial mask and studying it with eyes that now saw not just what it was, but what it could become. "I have been shown the path forward, but it will require techniques that I have never used before." She pointed to the luminous vein of jade that had been revealed the previous day. "This sacred jade must be carved using tools that have never touched ordinary stone. We must create new implements, blessed and purified specifically for this work." This was an extraordinary requirement. Master Jade Carvers typically used the same tools throughout their careers, implements that had been shaped by decades of use and had acquired their own spiritual significance. To create entirely new tools for a single project spoke to the exceptional nature of what they were undertaking. "What kind of tools will we need?" Itzamna asked, his apprentice's curiosity overcoming his natural deference. "Obsidian blades that have been knapped from stone taken directly from the sacred mountain," Itzel replied, beginning to gather materials for the tool-making process. "Drills carved from the bones of animals that died naturally, never hunted or sacrificed. Polishing stones that have never been used for any purpose other than this single project." The process of creating these sacred tools would take several days, but it was essential preparation for the delicate work that lay ahead. Each tool would be blessed by the priests, purified with sacred waters, and charged with spiritual energy through ritual and ceremony. As they worked together to prepare the new implements, Itzel shared more details of her vision with her apprentice. She described the divine figure who had appeared to her, the sacred hall of jade, and the profound significance of the mask they were creating. "This piece will outlive us both," she told him, "and its influence will extend far beyond our own time. Generations from now, when our names are forgotten, this mask will still carry the divine energy that we are placing within it." Chapter 13. The Master's Touch with the Sacred Tools, Prepared and Blessed. Itzel was ready to begin the most delicate phase of her work. The luminous vein of jade required techniques of extraordinary precision. One misplaced cut could destroy not just the aesthetic beauty of the piece, but its spiritual power as well. She began by mapping the exact path of the luminous vein, tracing its course through the jade with measurements so precise that they were calculated to the width of a single obsidian flake. The vein followed an elegant spiral pattern that would, when properly revealed, watch carefully, she instructed Itzamna. But do not try to replicate these techniques until you have observed them many times. What I am about to do cannot be learned through practice alone. It requires spiritual preparation and divine guidance, yet so delicate that the slightest error in pressure or angle could snap it instantly. The first cut along the luminous vein was barely visible to the naked Aja whisper of a line that followed the jade's natural inclination. Hour by hour, cut by microscopic cut, the spiral pattern began to emerge. It was not merely decorative, but functional, designed to channel and focus the spiritual energies that would flow through the mask during ceremonial use. As she worked, Itzel found herself entering a state of consciousness unlike anything she had experienced before. Her awareness seemed to expand beyond her individual identity, connecting her directly to the divine forces that guided all creation. Her hands moved with a precision that transcended mere skill, guided by wisdom that came from beyond the mortal realm. The other jade carvers in the workshop worked in respectful silence, understanding that they were witnessing something extraordinary. Even casual conversation was kept to a whisper, as if normal sound might disturb the delicate spiritual balance that Itzel was maintaining. As days turned into weeks, and the ceremonial mask continued to evolve under Itzel's patient hands, the true genius of its design began to reveal itself. What had started as a rough piece of green stone was becoming something that transcended mere craftsmanship. It was becoming a work of art that seemed to bridge the gap between the material and spiritual worlds. The face that emerged from the jade was both human and divine, familiar yet otherworldly. The features followed the sacred proportions exactly, but they were elevated by subtle details that spoke of divine rather than mortal nature. The eyes, in particular, seemed to hold a depth and intelligence that was almost unsettling in its intensity. But it was the luminous vein, now revealed as a complex spiral pattern that seemed to pulse with inner light, that truly set this piece apart from anything that had been created before, emphasizing the divine proportions while adding a layer of meaning that was both aesthetic and spiritual. "It's becoming alive," Itzamna whispered one morning as he helped prepare materials for the day's work. "When I look at it, I feel as if it's looking back at me." Itzal nodded seriously. "That is exactly what should be happening. A truly successful ceremonial mask does unjust represent a deity. It becomes a vessel through which the deity can manifest. What you're sensing is the awakening of the spiritual presence within the jade. This was the ultimate goal of all ceremonial jade carving, to create objects that were not merely symbolic, but functionally sacred, and those who did were remembered for generations. As word of the extraordinary mask spread through the community, visitors began arriving from distant settlements, drawn by reports of a jade carving unlike any seen before. Priests, scholars, and master craftsmen came to witness the work in progress, and all departed with the same sense of awe and reverence. The high priest himself made several visits, each time spending long minutes in silent contemplation of the emerging masterpiece. After one such visit, he took Itzel aside for a private conversation. "Master Itzel," he said, his usually composed demeanor showing signs of deep emotion, "I must tell you that this piece exceeds even my highest expectations. When it is complete, it will not merely serve in the festival of the green sunlight, will transform the entire ceremony." Chapter 15. The final details, with only weeks remaining before the festival of the green sun. Itzel began work on the mask's final details, the subtle textures and minute embellishments that would complete its transformation from carved stone to sacred artifact. This phase of the work required different tools and techniques, as well as a different kind of spiritual preparation. She began with the polishing process, using successively finer grades of sand and various plant-based compounds to bring out the jade's full beauty. The luminous vein required special attention. It had to be polished to perfect smoothness, while preserving the mysterious inner light that made it so extraordinary. As she worked, Itzel shared with Itzamna the deeper mysteries of jade polishing, techniques that were among the most closely guarded secrets of their craft. The final polish determines not just how a piece looks, but how it feels spiritually, she explained, demonstrating the precise circular motions that brought out the jade's natural luster. A poorly polished piece, no matter how perfectly carved, will feel dead to the touch, but when done properly, ... She paused, running her fingers across a section she had just completed. "Feel this." Itzamna placed his hand where his grandmother indicated. The jade was impossibly smooth, almost liquid beneath his fingertips, yet it seemed to pulse with warmth and energy. "It's alive," he whispered. "Exactly the stone must breathe through its surface. This is why we use the tears of the cecropier tree mixed with ground. Volcanic glassite opens the jade's pores, while sealing its spirit within day by day." The mask transformed under their careful attention. Itzel worked on the major surfaces, while Itzamna, under her guidance, polished the intricate details around the eyes and mouth. The luminous vein had become even more pronounced, seeming to glow with its own inner fire as the surrounding jade took on an almost mirror-like finish. "Now comes the most delicate work," Itzel announced one morning as she unwrapped a collection of tiny tools that Itzamna had never seen before. They were made from materials he could unidentify. Some appeared to be fashioned from the quills of exotic birds, others from polished obsidian no thicker than grass blades. "The final textures," she explained, selecting a tool that looked like a miniature brush made from what might have been hummingbird feathers. Each surface of the mask must have its own character. The forehead should feel like dawn mist, the cheeks like flower petals, the chin like river stones, worn smooth by centuries of water. She demonstrated on a practice piece, showing how different tools created subtly different textures. The eye sockets must feel like the inside of a conch shell's, smooth, but with the faintest suggestion of spirals. This helps channel the wearer's vision toward the spirit realm. Itzamna watched, fascinated, as his grandmother created textures so subtle they were almost imperceptible to the eye, yet distinct to the touch. Each area of the mask began to develop its own personality, its own spiritual signature. The mouth is the most important, Itzel continued, switching to an even finer tool. It must feel like the surface of still water just before dawn, perfectly smooth, yet somehow expectant, ready to speak the words of the gods. As she worked around the mask's lips, Itzamna noticed that the luminous veins seemed to respond to her touch, pulsing more brightly, as if the jade itself were aware of the approaching completion of its transformation. "Grandmother," he said quietly, the veins glowing more strongly. Itzel paused in her work and examined the mask carefully. Indeed, the mysterious luminescence had intensified and now seemed to pulse in rhythm with something unseen. "The jade knows," she said simply. "It senses that its destiny approaches. This is a good sign. It means the spirits approve of our work." With only days remaining before the festival, they began the final phase, the application of the sacred resins and oils that would protect the mask and enhance its spiritual properties. These substances, gathered from specific trees at particular phases of the moon, had to be applied in precise patterns while reciting prayers that had been passed down through generations. Itzel heated the first Razuna golden substance that smelled of copal and honey over a small brazier. "This must be applied while the mask is warm but not hot," she instructed. "Too much heat will close the jade's pores. Too little, and the resin won't penetrate properly." Using a brush made from the tail feathers of a quetzal, she began to apply the resin in long flowing strokes that followed the natural patterns in the jade. Where the brush touched, the stone seemed to come alive with an inner radiance. Each coat must dry completely before the next is applied, she explained, and each coat requires its own prayers, its own ritual preparation. By the time we finish, the mask will have received 7 layers of protection and blessing. As they worked through the intricate process, Itzamna felt the weight of tradition settling around them like a sacred mantle. Every motion, every word, every breath seemed significant. This was more than craftsmanship, was a communion with forces beyond the physical world. On the final day of preparation, as the last coat of resin dried in the pre-dawn darkness, Itzel and Itzamna sat in contemplative silence beside the completed mask. The luminous vein now pulsed with a steady, rhythmic glow, and the entire surface seemed to shimmer with barely contained energy. "Tomorrow night," Itzel said softly, "the high priest will wear this mask for the first time. He will become the vessel through which the Jade Lord speaks to our people. Our work is complete." Itzamna gazed at the mask, marveling at how it had transformed from a simple piece of stone into something that seemed to exist between the mortal and divine realms. "Will we be there to see it?" he asked. His grandmother smiled. "We will have the honor of presenting it to the high priest ourselves. But remember, my grandson, once it leaves our hands, it no longer belongs to us. It belongs to the people, to the gods, and to the sacred cycle that sustains all life." As the first light of dawn touched the workshop, the mask seemed to welcome the sun with a gentle radiance of its own. The festival of the green sun was one day away, and the most sacred artifact in generations was ready to fulfill its destiny. Subscribe and like.